Hello, my name is Shannon Herrick, and today I'm going to be presenting a systematic scoping review of physical education experiences from the perspectives of LGBTQ plus students. So because my research is primarily interested in how sexuality and gender identity influence experiences within physical activity, I work with LGBTQ plus communities. This is just an abbreviated acronym that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer identified people. Now, LGBTQ plus communities experience unique challenges to physical activity participation, the most obvious of which being sexuality and gender-based prejudices. Now, from my research, I have seen how formative LGBTQ plus youth experiences are when it comes to how LGBTQ plus adults view, see, and feel about physical activity. Namely, if LGBTQ plus adults have negative youth experiences, then that makes them view physical activity negatively and leads to avoidance later in life. So because of this, there exists a need to really look at LGBTQ plus youth experiences within physical activity. And what is the most common or ubiquitous physical activity experiences within adolescence? Well, that would be that which is mandated, which brings us to physical education. Now, despite an increase in inclusivity initiatives, what's actually been shown through a national sample is that the percentage of LGBTQ plus students who avoid PE classes has steadily increased from 2013 to 2019. Now, this could indicate that top-down inclusivity approaches when it comes to physical education just aren't that effective, which really speaks to a need to understand how LGBTQ plus students experience physical education in order to improve our inclusivity efforts. So this brings us to the research questions guiding this particular study, which is, what is the current state of research focused on LGBTQ plus student experiences within physical education? And from those studies and that research, what are some of the common LGBTQ plus student experiences within PE? So in order to answer these questions, I used a systematic scoping review. I'm following ARC-C O'Malley's 5-stage framework with the additional recommendations. The initial search took place May 14th, 2019. Across 8 databases, 2 types of terms were inserted, those which were related to LGBTQ plus identities and communities, and terms related to physical education. Now, in order for studies to be included within this literature review, they had to, of course, be exploring LGBTQ plus student experiences within PE. So it's important to note that because of this criteria, this excludes some research that looks at LGBTQ plus physical educators' experiences. The studies also needed to be available in English and published in peer-reviewed journals after 1990. Now, when it came to the participants within these studies, I was expecting 2 different types. Those which had LGBTQ plus adolescents speaking to their current experiences, and those which had LGBTQ plus adults recalling their previous experiences with physical education. So from the initial search, I had just under 19,000 articles. After screening for titles and screening just shy of 1,000 abstracts with an additional screener who was a lovely undergraduate research assistant. That left 11 abstracts which were retained for full text review. 3 studies were excluded because they focused primarily on school sport experiences as opposed to physical education experiences, which left from 18,000 to just 8. 8 studies were included in this literature review. So already you can kind of see the dearth of literature and research when it comes to LGBTQ plus student experiences within physical education. Now for the analysis, it was informed by the SWIM guidelines. We used a thematic analysis and we had 2 quoters. So we reviewed the full text and data extraction table in order to inform the conceptual mapping of the salient themes, primarily to answer that research question too about what are some of the common findings. So the results, I'm going to present them as answers to the 2 research questions. So the first research question, what's the current state of research? Take it with a big grain of salt because we're only referring to those 8 studies. So obviously there's not a lot. So of the 8, they were primarily qualitative studies. 4 were conducted with LGBTQ plus adolescents. However, only 2 had the majority of participants identifying as LGBTQ plus, meaning those other 2 studies only had 1 to 2 participants identify as LGBTQ plus, the rest identified as cis and heterosexual. And then the remaining studies were conducted with LGBTQ plus adults reflecting on their adolescent experiences. Now, onto kind of the meat of this review, which is what are some of the common findings? Now, because we only looked at 8 studies and because they had such a variety of methodologies and research questions, the conceptual mapping really spoke to broad sociocultural influences on the organization of PE and of course on LGBTQ plus experiences. So I'm going to quickly run through this conceptual map. So first of which, The bulk of studies found that physical education discourses privileged students that exhibit able-bodied masculinity, whiteness, and heterosexuality. Now, one of the intersections within intersectionality is, of course, the intersection between cis-sexism and heterosexism, commonly referred to as cis-heteronormativity. Some of the aspects of cis-heteronormativity that were really prevalent within PE were the glorification of hegemonic masculinity, as well as the reinforcement of the gender binary. And these worked to marginalize LGBTQ+ students within PE. It was also found across 6 studies that homophobia and transphobia were commonly used as methods for reinforcing cis-heteronormativity and further marginalizing LGBTQ+ students within physical education. Now, it was also found that within physical education, there was generally a lack of intervention on behalf of the physical educators when it came to instances of homophobia and transphobia within physical education. Also, it was shown in the majority of studies that the student experiences within PE were greatly influenced by their relationship within with their physical education teachers, meaning that if they had a really positive and affirming relationship, they had a better experience. And if they had a negative, exclusive relationship with their PE teachers, they had a negative experience. Now, within physical education, we also found this double gendering process. So there were 2 different gendering processes involved within physical education experiences. The first of which is the gendering of the students themselves. The most obvious examples of which would be in locker rooms, which follow oftentimes the male-female binary of gender, as well as division during class. So this could be division into men's and women's sports teams, or the division of expectations based on some interesting preconceived notions about how gender influences strength, let's say. And then there was the gendering of the activities themselves, which were coded as masculine or feminine, wherein within physical education, the masculine physical activities were championed, and the feminine activities like dance were often subjugated as a result. So on to the discussion really quickly. Obviously, there's a big dearth of research exploring LGBTQ+ experiences within PE. The variability of student experiences seem to be directly related to the relationship with PE teachers, and future research should really explore and challenge this gendering process within PE by considering the subjective positions of other marginalized students. So some conclusions. So the omnipresence of cis heteronormativity adversely influences LGBTQ+ experiences in physical education through homophobic and transphobic practices, and then these gendering processes, which can be explicit or implicit. And finally, experiences of current LGBTQ+ students within PE should be prioritized to inform and evaluate inclusive policies, curricula, and PE teacher training. And with that, my presentation is done.